People have always died. Some of the earliest signs of culture that we've discovered in our ancient ancestors is ceremonial burial, with objects of importance sometimes brought from great distances to remember someone, to give them something for the afterlife, or to offer a gift as they are gone. The Jewish origin story for humanity begins with human beings acquiring two things beyond their innocent beginnings. They acquire knowledge, and they die. And maybe those two are connected. And once we know that we will die. There's always been many ways to die, suddenly or slowly, quickly or painfully, a good death or a bad death. I want to begin this discussion of this new world of medical aid in dying with a story from the Talmud. It dates back to around the year 200, maybe 220 of the Common Era. It's about the imminent death of one of the preeminent rabbis of this era, whose name is Rabbi Judah. The death of Rabbi Judah Hanasi, Judah the Prince. It is related on the day that Rabbi Judah Hanasi died, the sages decreed a fast and begged for divine mercy so that he would not die. They didn't want him to die. They wanted to keep him alive. And they said, anyone who says that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi has died will be stabbed with a sword. Don't even think it, lest it come to pass. And so, the maidservant of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi ascended to the roof. And she said, the upper realms, heavens, right, are requesting the presence of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and the lower realms, that is the earth, are requesting his presence. He's wanted in two places. May it be the will of God that the lower world should impose their will on the upper world. So even if the heavens are calling him, quote, home, as some might say, let him stay on the earth. However, when she saw how many times he would enter the bathroom and remove his tefillin, his phylacteries, and then exit and have to put them back on, and when she saw how he was suffering with his intestinal disease, she said, may it be the will that the upper worlds impose their will on the lower worlds. Let him go. Just let him go. And the sages, meanwhile, would not be silent. They would not stop begging for mercy so he would not die. Their prayers were keeping him alive. So she took a jug and threw it from the roof to the ground. Due to the smash, the sudden noise, the sages were momentarily silent and refrained from begging for mercy. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was free to die. Now, I first heard this story in a class on religious ethics. It was focused on the question of whether we are allowed to remove life support from someone being kept alive. After all, the prayers are keeping him alive, and she removes him from that ventilator from the 2nd century. And most people today are familiar with hospice, which accepts someone with a terminal condition and stops treatment, trying to fix them. It simply provides palliative care to make the person comfortable and as pain-free as possible. There have been discussions of the role of doctors in the death process in ancient Greece and Rome, and since then. In the 19th century, the discovery of anesthesia raised questions of, do we just give them more morphine, more sedatives, and help things along in the direction they're already going? Advocacy for physician intervention in the process of death was tamped down after the Holocaust because of the revelations of Nazi treatment of the disabled and medical experiments, and also the news that came out in later decades of experiments on African Americans, the Tuskegee syphilis experiments and other cases where people were experimented on, not necessarily with consent. Well, trusting the doctors to just do what's right became less automatic. However, in the 60s and 70s, we saw renewed advocacy leading to the concept of an advance directive, where you could make a statement that was legally binding of how you wanted to be cared for and what care you would decline if you could. And also the concept of a do not resuscitate order that would apply. Some of you may remember the case of Karen Ann Quinlan, who was removed from life support after extended legal proceedings, setting a precedent that indeed someone who was gone could be let go. Court cases gradually allowed life support to be removed, but modern medical aid in dying, also sometimes referred to by the acronym MAID, sometimes also called death with dignity, or physician-assisted suicide, or even euthanasia, that's something different. And in Illinois, it will be legal on September 12th, which, as I said, this year is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. Do you remember Jack Kevorkian, the doctor from Michigan, sometimes known as Dr. Death? He actually was a pathologist, a doctor who specialized in what happens around death. He grew up in Detroit in an Armenian family, and he actually attended Armenian church growing up until about age 12. His mother had fled the Armenian genocide in the 19-teens, and he asked, how could a God allow that to happen? And lost his faith and gained a humanism out of that. He trained in pathology at the University of Michigan Medical School, and even in his early medical history, he made some radical proposals. In the 1960s, for example, he proposed allowing death row prisoners, who were going to be killed anyways, to donate themselves to science for non-painful experimentation, at the end of which they would be dead, but at least their death would serve some purpose, as he envisioned it. Beginning in 1990, Dr. Kevorkian began directly helping people to end their own lives. By the end, his attorney, Jeffrey Feiger, suggested that around 130 people had been helped by Dr. Kevorkian or had been murdered by Dr. Kevorkian, depending on your perspective on what he was doing. Dr. Jack would connect them to devices that he created that gave them chemicals to fall asleep and stop their heart. One was based on carbon monoxide, one was based on intravenous chemicals. He would set them up, but they would have to take some kind of action to make the machine work, to remove a clip, to push a button. They had to take agency in doing it. If it sounds familiar to have pity on someone facing pain and unremitting suffering and dealing with the end of life by helping them along, it's familiar because it happens to thousands of pets with terminal illnesses every year. But we use euphemisms for the pets. We say they were put down or put to sleep, or if your children are very young, they went to live on a farm somewhere. So I want to show you a short video about Dr. Kevorkian and his life and his work that came out when he died in 2011. This was originally on PBS. One of the reasons why he was acquitted so many times was that at the trial, they would show a video of him talking with his patient, as he called them, and you could see the agony on the person's face. And you could hear how fervently they were done. They were just done. And it became clear that he was acting from a sense of mercy for them. And the juries wouldn't convict him. They acquitted him and mistrialed him. The difference in the last case was that he injected. Dr. Kevorkian did the injection because the person himself simply had no motor skills to be able to do anything. And that was the difference that enabled him to be convicted. If you want to learn more about his work, there's a fantastic movie based on his life story called You Don't Know Jack. It's by HBO Theaters. And one of the things they did in that movie that was fascinating is Al Pacino plays Dr. Kevorkian, but they reworked the video based on the original videos of him talking to real patients, but they put Pacino as Kevorkian playing Kevorkian on like a split, on the other half of the screen. So he's injected, the character acting is injected into the videos. But it's very, very powerful because you feel like you're on those juries and you're hearing these people asking to end their lives. Well, these kind of stories are why we know this is a need. We may have experienced people at the end of life who were done. They were done. And maybe waiting for death was not a good option for them because of the risk of something else happening or simply the suffering that they were in. Now, I found this video this week. This person I've actually known for a long time. She's my wife's great aunt, Aunt Judy, and she was diagnosed with a terminal condition. She lives in Canada, which also has medical aid in dying. And so she decided that she wanted to end her life. She explains a bit why in this short video. But she also had the chance to say goodbye, not just with phone calls or videos. She actually convened a party at her apartment, and her extended family and cousins, her children, her grandchildren, they were all there to celebrate her life with her. Was she exhausted? Yes. Did she put on a good face for the event when people were there, and was she uplifted by them? Yes. Was it tears and laughter? Yes. But it was the chance to say goodbye and the chance for her to hear you express how much you cared. And so this is a short video from Dying with Dignity Canada that Judy recorded before she ended her life. And I want you to hear what she has to say. Can you say no to that? I mean, that's a good life. That's a good death. In the aftermath of Dr. Kevorkian's activity, American law began to change. In 1997, the Supreme Court unanimously upheld Washington's state ban on assisted suicide. But they didn't say you couldn't allow it. And so state laws began to be passed that made it legal in those specific states. And more recently, a couple of states have had their residency requirements challenged, so in theory you could even travel to one of those states. So here's a map of the states where medical aid in dying is currently legal. There are a couple of states where there's pending legislation that may come forward. Illinois used to be that cream color, and now it's green because it's been passed. It was passed at the end of last year. It takes effect in September. There was a window of time to get things ready and policies in place and so on. If you look at the chart, the first state in which it was legalized was Oregon, all the way back in 1994. Remember, Kevorkian starts in 1990, so it's in some ways a response to that media furor. But it takes a long time for another state to make it legal. In Washington, it became legal in 2008. Montana, via state Supreme Court decision, where it said there's no law on the books to prevent it, so now it's de facto legal, even if not legally prescribed or available. Vermont in 2013, California, Colorado, and Washington, D.C. in 2016, Hawaii in 2018, New Jersey, Maine, New Mexico, and then Illinois most recently. So now it's 14 states in which it's legal, 4 states or territories, including D.C., which encompasses a fair amount of the population of the country. But what's striking is that the surveys, when you ask people, do you support this, are even more overwhelming in support than are reflected on this map. So this is a survey done by the Pew Study, the Pew Research Center that studies American opinion on a variety of issues. And they asked people questions about 2 things. One is, should a doctor be allowed to end a patient's life by painless means if the patient or the family wants it? And the second option, should doctors be allowed to help a patient commit suicide? So the green line is the doctor doing it. The blue line is the doctor helping someone commit suicide, that physician-assisted suicide. And what you'll notice, by the way, first of all, that the numbers for both are well over 60%. It's 2/3 or more for either question today. But notice the gap. That gap means that people are more comfortable with the doctor doing it than with the doctor facilitating someone to do it themselves, because of the stigma around that word, suicide. There's something that people some people at least, see a distinction, where if the doctor is giving extra morphine at the end of life, or the person is brain dead and they're letting things go, that's acceptable for the doctor to do it. But for you to do it to yourself, even with the doctor's help for some people, is a line too far. Religiously, this was thought to be a kind of self-murder, or even a rejection of divine providence. After all, remember that story of the pot smashing when the maid threw it off the roof? The people who were praying to keep the rabbi alive we're not obeying the divine will, because the powers above, in the maid's interpretation, wanted Rabbi Judah to die. And the people down here were interfering with that plan. So she changed it. But you're supposed to accept the divine will. And so I've collected just a few Jewish sources related to this topic. Here's one example from that same Pirkei Avot, the sayings of the fathers we saw in our service. The ones who are born are to die, and the ones who have died are to be brought to life in an afterlife in rabbinic thought, and the ones brought to life are to be judged. And know that all is according to the reckoning. Let not your impulse assure you that the grave is a place of refuge for you, because against your will you were formed, against your will you were born, against your will you live, against your will you will die, and against your will you will give an account and reckoning before the King of Kings. In other words, you are not in charge of your life or your death. There's a divine plan, and if you interfere with that or meddle with that or change gears or try to steer somewhere else, it's wrong. It's just wrong. So in another passage from the Mishnah, which is rabbinic thought from, say, 220 of the Common Era and before, this section discusses what to do about a suicide. We do not occupy ourselves with the funeral rites of one who committed suicide willfully. Rabbi Ishmael says, well, maybe we can say to him, alas for the loss, alas for the loss. But Rabbi Akiva said, leave him unmourned, say nothing. No tearing the cloth, no eulogy, no mourning for someone who commits suicide willfully. We do not tear garments for him. We do not bare the shoulder, deliver a memorial address for him. However, we do stand in a row at the burial and recite the blessing of the mourners at his event out of respect for the living. After all, he has relatives, and they're mourning. And so, with respect to the living, we occupy ourselves, but anything that does not respect the living, the public does not get involved. They are a death non grata. But of course, this raises the question, suicide willfully? Who comes within the category of committing suicide? How do you know that he meant to do it? He does not count as willfully if he climbed to the top of a tree and fell down. Could have been an accident, right? Or if he went to the top of the roof and he fell down and died. But someone who calls out, look, I am going to the top of the roof or the top of the tree, and I will throw myself down so I will die. That comes within the category of willful. It's obvious that they have an intent, and then you don't mourn them because they're this suicide that was willful. A later collection of rabbinic law called the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch from the 1860s reflects the evolution of this thought. Without proof to the contrary, a man is not presumed to be wicked. If he is found asphyxiated or hanged or something like that, as long as it's possible to assume that he was murdered, it should not be considered a suicide. It could have been an accident, it could have been murder, you don't know. A minor who committed suicide is considered like one who took his life by accident. They're a minor, you don't blame them. And similarly, an adult who committed suicide and it appears like they did so because of severe depression or madness, it is considered unintentional. If he did so under duress, because he was afraid of torture like King Saul, who feared the Philistines might do something to him, he is like any other deceased person and nothing is withheld. Do you see the parallels to the situation? Where we're finding ways to be able to mourn them, even though they committed suicide, even if they intended to do so. But we give them the benefit of the doubt that they were under duress or depression or temporarily insane. Or maybe they were afraid of pain. You can imagine scenarios in the Holocaust and World War II where this might have happened, but you can imagine a scenario today where the pain is not a torturer. It's a cancer. It's a stroke. Maybe that pain is enough to justify the decision. However, the same passage explains, all those who separate themselves from the way of the community, such as those people who have cast off the yoke of mitzvot, of commandments from themselves, and do not include themselves among the Jewish people with observing commandments, but are like a liberated sect of their own, Hello, Humanistic Judaism or Reform Judaism. For all those, including apostates, informers, and heretics, the laws of mourning are not observed, and their death is not mourned. Their brothers and other relatives dress in white and adorn themselves in white, eat, drink, and rejoice that the enemies of the Almighty have perished. So on one hand, we forgive the suicide. We find reasons to explain it away. But for someone who is willfully wicked, the enemies of God are gone and we celebrate. Now, with the laws of medical aid in dying, you generally have to express a clear intent, and you have to do it multiple times, in writing sometimes. It's the equivalent of standing up on the roof and saying, "Look, I'm about to throw myself off." So what does this mean? Will they not be eligible for burial in a Jewish cemetery? Will there be no mourning rituals prescribed? Will no rabbis officiate at their funerals? I will. But traditional rabbis, will they be rejected? Or maybe the evolution of Jewish life has come to the point where we will accept their non-traditional choices, just like people with tattoos, or people who never kept kosher in their entire life. I know of no story of some family that had the celebratory meal when their heretic nephew dies. That isn't how we work today. And so if they're being non-traditional in diet or dress or lifestyle, and they're non-traditional in how their life ends, then maybe we'll be more accepting. But there's a practical question with these laws. Even if we agree on the overall goal, how do you make this legal and avoid some of the problems that could come up? Maybe I'll ask you, what do you think could be some of the problems, problem situations, ethical dilemmas, dynamics that will be a challenge? Yeah.
So, since maybe I work with a lot of people who are going through this. And one particular case that comes to mind was somebody who had gone to he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, went to Switzerland, to die. He changed his mind because he wasn't ready yet. Came back here and saw me, and the difficulty is always you have to be of sound mind, and how you define sound mind. And when I was talking to him, I'm also reminded of a story where, and it was Ask Alice, or Still Alice, if anybody saw that documentary, if anybody saw the movie, about a woman who basically, what I was trying to say is, you might not want to be that person with Parkinson's that you see now, but once you become that person with Parkinson's, you might not feel that way. And that's always kind of like, are you the person you are now making that choice? You're making your choice now for your future self, and it's a hard choice to make because your future self might feel differently.
So a couple of challenges. There's the dementia or state of mind question. There's the can you rescind a decision? And there's the moving target of what I imagine will be unbearable in the future versus what I've evolved into and I'm more willing to live.
And he ended up going back to and going through with it eventually. But what I was going to say too is that there's always this issue if you have depression, because is depression considered, a lot of the time it's considered an illness that will prevent you from making that decision, because then you're not of sound mind. And then is depression an illness in general that you can commit suicide for, surrounded by family and people, in order to have a peaceful ending?
That's definitely another challenge.
Lots of ideas.
Yes. Some other challenges that might come up? Yeah, Al.
The other thing is with, of course, money. If you have a life insurance policy and you commit suicide, you only get back what you put in, not the full value, and you have to argue with the insurance companies to do it.
Yeah, and so what happens in this circumstance, right? Right. There's a lot of other issues.
I think
sure.
Another issue is the transient, I'm also mental health, I'm a psychiatrist, is there are two things I was going to bring up. One is the transient aspect of something like depression, and also this is true of other illnesses as well. You never know what's around the corner in terms of treatment. And I've said to people who, I mean, speaking of roofs, I had a patient who said, I'd have to call the security because I knew she was on some roof in the Northwestern campus. This is decades ago. I still see her now, actually. And she has had a stroke at a young age. But so there's that transient quality that the patient might not even realize because they have blinders on. They know what they know right now. They can't imagine. The other thing really interesting, a few years ago, I was working at a facility that is centered in Colorado, ERC Pathline. So Pathline is mood and anxiety, and then ERC is eating disorders. And they nationally treat from more minor to extremely ill patients. They actually have an ICU in Denver for eating disorder patients. And at that point, there was this huge debate. I don't think it's been resolved. I don't know if you're aware of this.
I've read about this.
About a suicide being acceptable for chronic anorectics.
Right, compassionate care.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a real provocative issue.
That's a question of, do you only allow it for terminal patients? Or is it, or chronic issues, does that
Right.
become a category? The question of what qualifies and what doesn't.
Right, well, there's a
is
big difference
major
between somebody who has Parkinson's and is demented and is not ambulatory, et cetera, or somebody with cancer, whatever, and somebody with something like anorexia, which is even though they haven't turned around, they're now 30 years old and they've had it for 15 years, it doesn't mean they won't.
Right.
Their bodies have the potential.
Well, this is part of the question of drawing the line.
Yeah.
What conditions are too far? What circumstances would you allow it?
Right.
Does it have to be terminal? Do they have to be able to move? If they have ALS and they have no motor coordination, to be able to actively do something, someone has to help them,
Right.
but is that allowed? So how you draw these lines in a legal circumstance get very, very complicated. Anyone else have any thoughts on other complications? I've got plenty more, and actually what we're going to do is we'll take a look at the law that Illinois passed and try to see what are the concerns they're trying to address by the way they've designed the law. And we'll see some of those challenges as they come up. So why don't we turn to doing that? Oh, I wanted to point out also, if you look at the Hippocratic Oath, this is actually the original version, some of the clauses there might be a problem for a doctor being involved in this work. After all, it says, I will do no harm or injustice to them. Neither will I administer a poison to anybody when asked to do so, nor will I suggest such a course. So that would suggest it's not allowed. Similarly, I will not give to a woman a pessary to cause abortion. The original Hippocratic Oath didn't allow doctors to participate in that either. There are modern versions of the Hippocratic Oath. Almost no schools use the original version these days. But actually, some Jewish medical schools use a different version. It's called Maimonides' Oath of Physicians. It wasn't written by Maimonides. It was written in the 1860s and then ascribed back to Maimonides. But the idea here is a little more flexible. Providence has appointed me to watch over the life and health of your creatures. And you want to be motivated by caring for them. May I never see in the patient anything but a fellow creature in pain, not a source of money or revenue, or a place to exercise power or play God. And then notice at the end, I underline the part, you have appointed me to watch over the life and death of your creatures. Well, if I'm in charge of their life and their death, then maybe it's not a bright red line that I cannot participate in the death process in any way. So here is, I'm not giving you the legalese of the actual bill. This is a summary of the bill that appeared on the website of Governor Pritzker. I'll also point out, by the way, this is written for political purposes, right? If it's on the governor's website, it's not just an explainer, it's an explainer trying to address objections, concerns, complaints about the bill. So you can see some of the language he chooses to use. The headline, signs bill expanding end-of-life options for terminally ill patients. We're giving them options. Not that we're telling them this is what you have to do. Illinois is the 12th state, so again it's highlighting we're not number one, we're number 12 in this process, to enact legislation providing terminally ill patients with autonomy, dignity, and peace. Are you opposed to giving them autonomy, dignity, and peace? Oh, of course, those are all wonderful things at the end of their life. The end of their life is coming anyways. So we're just helping that process. It expands compassionate end-of-life options in a manner that establishes clear process, guidelines, and protocols. Several safeguards, second sentence, safeguards, are in place to ensure robust patient protection. Again, notice the language, safety, protection. No physician, healthcare provider, or pharmacist is required to participate in the option. What if your doctor thinks this is murder? What if the pharmacist, I can't give you this prescription? You're not required, and the healthcare provider is not required to participate. In fact, hospitals can choose to deny it. Hospitals can prevent their doctors from participating in this. The hospital can say, none of our doctors are allowed to do this. So if you're a Catholic hospital, you don't have to allow your doctors working in your practice to do that. The law makes it a felony to coerce anyone to request the medication or to forge a request. That's one of the other fears. What if my family, what if someone near me is pushing me to do this? They're worried about expenses, they've got their own life they want to get back. You can't do it. It's a felony to coerce anyone into doing this or to forge the request for them. Adult patients requesting the end-of-life medication have to have a terminal illness that will result in death within 6 months. So they had to pick a time frame, and they had to pick a terminal illness to make it happen. Not chronic, not something that won't kill you, even if it causes you pain. And you need 2 doctors to sign off on it. They have a whole form and process that they have to go through. You need to be informed by the physicians about all their end-of-life care options, including comfort care, hospice, palliative care. You have to let them know there are other choices. Again, notice the language, options, safety, autonomy, choice. The person has to have the mental capacity confirmed by their physician to make medical decisions. And you can call in a psych consult to get an evaluation of that they're able to make these decisions. And make written and oral requests in order to receive the aid in dying medication. So you have to put it in writing, and you have to say it out loud. And the request can only be made by the patient, not by the patient's surrogate, not by their decision maker, their healthcare proxy, their healthcare agent, their attorney in fact for healthcare, their guardian, nor by advanced care directive. So if you're in a position that you can't ask anymore, even if you wrote it out in advanced care directive, it doesn't apply. Now why? Why? Because imagine if you didn't have this protection, what could happen? Someone else does it for you, right? Someone else does it without your consent. You say, oh, I'm in so much pain, I wish I could die, but you don't put it in writing. And then someone takes that seriously and runs. You can see they're trying to avoid the abuses. Now the balance to that is they're going to say no to people who really want it, because the safeguards limits who's able to do it. Notice also 18 or older. There's no provision for someone under 18 to take advantage of this, even with a terminal condition. So what is the process? This is still from the governor's summary. Patients who meet eligibility criteria must make several oral and written requests in order to receive medical aid in dying medication. The written request must be signed by the requesting patient and witnessed by at least 2 individuals who attest that the patient had the mental capacity to make the decision and is doing it voluntarily and not being coerced. Again, no coercion, it's their choice, and witnessed by people who can attest that they were in their right mind to do so. Patients who qualify must be able to self-administer the medication. You have to be able to take the pills yourself. You can't have someone do it for you. Patients who qualify and receive medication have the right to withdraw their request at any time or choose not to ingest it. And they found in states that have legalized this, that of the people who get the prescription, some of them never fill it. And the people who fill it, some of them never use it. They just want to know they have the option, if it gets too much, that they can take that step. So you don't have to use it, and you don't even have to fill the prescription. You could always say, not at this time. And this one I find fascinating. The death certificates of those who take end-of-life medication under the bill will attribute their cause of death to the underlying terminal disease. The death certificate won't say suicide. The cause of death was the disease that led to the medical aid in dying. And it'll be available on September 12th, Rosh Hashanah, day, not evening. So, this is the law that will be the law of the land in Illinois. You can hear many of the concerns that are part of that. Yes?
There's an organization in the United States called the Final Exit.
Yes, there's Final Exit, there's Compassion and Choices, there's a lot of these. Can you talk into the mic?
You do not need any kind of drug or prescription. You go to any toy store, buy a bag of helium, and commit suicide without a doctor, without a psychiatrist, without anybody. They send you all the information and how to do it.
Yeah. Well, I am sure that there are hundreds of cases in states that were not green on that map every year where this takes place. Spouses for each other, partners together, individuals who make the choice that they're done. And they do, a do-it-yourself approach, whether it's through an organization or researching online. There was a book some years ago, I think it was called The American Way of Death, that gave recommendations like this. So there are ways that people do it. Sometimes it's with guns, too. I mean, this happens also, that you get it's called a murder-suicide, but it was really a plan for the end of life. And so this does happen in all those other states, and I don't know how diligently the police investigate. When they find a circumstance like this, and there's been a chronic illness, and there's been desire, and then this person passes away because they took too many pills or they had this thing, I'm not sure. There are cases of people being prosecuted for helping someone die like that, but in other cases, I imagine they simply let it go because they understand the compassion need of the people involved. I saw a couple other hands up here. Yeah, Rich.
How would somebody with ALS be able to do this with the inhibitions that the disease causes?
The answer is, according to the Illinois law, they can't.
Or they do it.
That's how Kevorkian was in prison, because he did the injection for someone who couldn't do it for themselves.
It's even difficult for them to express themselves.
Right. The clear expression, writing something, signing something, right?
Some of them have done it before it progresses to that point. If you're a fan of This American Life, there is a story in This American Life of a couple going to Zurich. He has ALS, his wife is accompanying him to do this, and he is doing it before the disease gets to the point where he could not.
And this is the dilemma of if you're facing a degenerative disease, when do you pull the ripcord, Because you could miss out on not only cures, but also life and experiences. But if you get too far, whether it's a dementia issue or it's a physical capability issue, then you could suffer more. I mean, that story that Judith Rocker told, where she said, I could throw a stroke at any moment, and I don't want to do that. And it's going to happen anyways. All these things are calcified, and the risk of going the wrong way, having a bad death, is something I want to avoid. I saw Larry had a hand up. If you could pass the mic.
I might be off topic a little bit. Just, do you know of any legal or even philosophical discussion about who owns my life? Clearly another person can't. Slavery is illegal. But neither do I if I can't choose to take it.
Well, this is an interesting question. Is suicide a crime? Only if you fail.
And there was a Broadway show, Whose Life Is It Anyways?
Yeah.
But that's, I believe, was in the 80s.
Yeah.
I can't believe that, just one comment, that the death certificate is as meaningful as that is. I can't believe that's going to hold up. I don't know if it's only Illinois that's saying that it wasn't a suicide, but it was Parkinson's or whatever it was, because it's a falsehood. It's not. I don't think it would ever hold up in court. I think it's going to be challenged. But
We'll see.
Do you know if it's other states?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting question. It'll also be interesting to see what the reaction will be. When this law passed, the first I heard of it passing was a note from the Chicago Board of Rabbis saying they were convening a discussion to talk about it. I didn't see anything, I don't read a daily newspaper, but I didn't see anything more broadly. I would have thought the Catholic protests would have been like stopping traffic all over Chicago, but really it wasn't. Evidently they put enough provisions in to create space for the Catholic hospital, the Catholic doctor to decline, that they weren't being forced to do it, that it wasn't to the point of stopping the city. But we'll see. We'll see what provisions are challenged. We'll see what holds up. And a lot of these laws that passed, we saw the year that the law passed, but they also had to go through court challenges and qualifications and clarifications. And so it's going to be a process.
Who was the man who spoke here years ago?
Oh, I don't remember. We had someone from...
Somebody who headed it, who was
Yeah.
spearheading it in Illinois.
yeah, it was someone who was running
can't
the
remember his
Compassion
name.
and Choices chapter
Yeah,
here.
he was very impressive, I thought.
Yeah. I had a comment over here.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I have a question. From a religious perspective, I'm not like religious. I believe in God. I'm not Jewish, but beautiful. My question I have is there any allowance for in all the religions of the world for the wisdom of God, knowing that he or she or they created humans who could have this capacity to create ways to help people? Do you know what I'm saying?
Right. I mean, you and I wear glasses, okay? So we've used science to improve life. Are we not allowed to use science to deal with death, or is that interfere? Look, it's the same dilemma that comes out with the HPV vaccine, right? The human papilloma virus. You can vaccinate someone at 8 or 9 years old and prevent this terrible sexually transmitted disease later in life. But some religious people object to it because they say you're interfering with God's plan to get these sluts cancer. I mean, they see it as a divine judgment. They do take other medications, so how do you draw that line? So there absolutely are religious people who see this as part of a divine plan to provide compassion and mercy and so on. I mean, after all, David, you're blocking the camera, sorry. They see it as part of a divine plan for people to be, in partnership with a God, or to use their knowledge to reduce suffering in the world. So there absolutely are religious figures behind it. If you look at the governor's webpage that talks about this, I think maybe half of the quotations are from Episcopal ministers and rabbis, and they're definitely picking religious figures to endorse it for precisely that reason. So it isn't a case of religion says no and secular godless science says yes. There are differing religious approaches to this question of what to do at the end of life. So what does humanistic Judaism have to say about it? Well, we actually had an organization in our movement in 1995, in the midst of the Kevorkian stuff, that put out a statement. It was the Leadership Conference of Secular and Humanistic Jews that created a statement on aid and dying. It was issued in December of 1995. And they wanted to grapple with this question, including Larry's philosophical question of who owns your life? Who gets to make this decision for somebody? Should rational, competent adults have the right to assistance in dying? We live longer lives and longer deaths made possible through advances in medical science. But even palliative treatment at the end of life may be regarded by some persons afflicted by irreversible illness as prolonging suffering and death instead of enhancing life. And so, as humanists, as Jews, as philosophic counselors, our respect for the autonomy and dignity of the individual and our compassion for one who is suffering dictate we must respect a considered request to end suffering. So if somebody makes a considered request, we respect their autonomy, we respect their dignity, and we have compassion for their pain, and that encourages us to support their choice. And so we affirm the right of competent individuals to make responsible decisions regarding the basic aspects of their life, free from interference. That's not just how they die, but also how they live. It's a consistent philosophical perspective, and regulated only to provide appropriate safeguards. The abuse question, the compelling someone to do it. And so this principle applies to a choice to hasten death too. Ultimately, the wishes of the person faced with terminal illness and suffering should take precedence, even though there are consequences that apply to society, to their family, and so on. And so their statement was that human beings, a competent adult, have an irreversible medical condition and a reasonably ascertainable time of death, didn't pick a date, accompanied by unbearable suffering, should have the right to assistance in dying. But notice what's included there. They have to be a competent adult, an irreversible medical condition, a reasonably ascertainable time of death, and unbearable suffering. So what if someone has a predicted time of death but isn't suffering? Could they do this? What if they have unbearable suffering but not a predictable time of death? They might not qualify. Again, how you draw that line, where you decide this is allowed and this is not, it's very, very difficult and complicated because you're going to include some people one way and exclude people another way. People making these requests should make fully informed decisions, knowing the alternatives of other modes of treatment and palliative care, and we should invest in making sure that care is available. Adequate safeguards should be present, so the request for aid in dying is informed and voluntary, free from undue influence, and it's a rational request. And finally, it should be done only under the direction of a licensed physician. So buying a bag of helium and doing it for your cousin, well, that might not be the best practice, but you need a doctor willing to participate. So the doctor can't be forced either. And then finally, and here's where we talk about the new frontiers. All required safeguards have been met. The request should be honored even if the person making the request has subsequently become incompetent. So what if they asked for it and then the stroke, the dementia, the decline, do you still act? I mean, I've had relatives say, if I don't know who you are anymore, roll me off a cliff, whatever needs to be done.
But then when they don't know you anymore, they're pleasantly confused and happy. I struggle with this all the time because you say if you don't recognize me anymore, throw me off the cliff. But then they become that person, and their life isn't as bad. They're not depressed. They're not crying. They're being cared for. They're not always. Not always. I would even say I see some of this with my own mother.
Yeah.
If I ever get this way, and it's like you slowly become that way, but then you're living in a assisted living community and you have friends, and yeah, maybe you forget things, but that person that you were afraid of becoming, who has more autonomy, the person that you are now or the person that you thought you were going to become?
And sometimes, if you haven't gotten your ducks in a row, you can wind up in these terrible catch-22s. So I know somebody whose mother lived well into her 90s, but they actually had to do surgery on her because she had never signed a DNR, she had never signed any advance directives, and so her son wasn't able to get a medical power of attorney to be able to decline treatment. So Medicare actually had to pay, or Medicaid in that case, had to pay for surgery on this 90-plus-year-old woman who didn't even know who her son was anymore. When otherwise, she could have, if she had advance directived it, and she could have declined the treatment, and then she would have died from that condition. And so she lingered, and sometimes she was cheerful, but sometimes she was confused, and she was upset, and it wasn't a joyful life. And that's one of those cases, again, where the more we take control of our choices and options ahead of time, the more we can avoid those kind of terrible, circular spirals down that are so difficult on the families too, not just on the individual. So these are some of the new frontiers, and they're coming up all the time. What about the physician actually acting? In some parts of the world, that can be done. The Kevorkian over the line, that is done in some places. I just heard a story on NPR this week, on Wednesday afternoon, about two doctors in Canada where medical aid in dying is allowed, who are proposing a new way of handling the end of life, and they call it death by donation. Currently, the only way you can donate organs that will kill you to remove, like a heart, like both kidneys, the only way you can do that is to be dead. Even if someone's brain dead, they actually have to remove the machine, allow them to die, and then they can, as they say, harvest or donate the organs. But what this would be is someone dealing with a terminal condition, who knows they're going to die could say, I want to help as many people as possible. I want you to take all my blood, I want you to take all my organs, anything that can help someone else, and use it. And then their life will eventually expire, without those pieces in place. But the concept of having doctors take someone who's alive and then take all the functional pieces out and reapply them to other people is disturbing. And one of the critics of this approach says that the problem with this is that it might undermine confidence in physician-assisted suicide and in organ donation. Because if people hear that they're just taking these organs out of people till they kill them, then maybe they don't want to say they're an organ donor, because it might be like that scene in the Monty Python movie, The Meaning of Life, where they say, are you an organ donor? And they come and take his liver. Nobody wants that. So we have to find a balance there. But this idea of death by donation, on one hand, you think to yourself, well, that could really help a lot of people. But on the other hand, I don't know. There's a wonderful movie from the 1980s. It's in French-Canadian French. So if you know French, you're not going to understand it, because French-Canadian French is its own animal. But it's called Jésus de Montréal, or Jesus of Montreal. It's about a theater troupe that's putting on a Jesus life and death story. And at the end of the movie, sorry to spoil the ending, but at the end of the movie there's an incident, and the Jesus actor who's playing Jesus dies. But they decide to donate his organs. And the lame walk, and the blind see, and the sick are healed. He does what Jesus did through his own body, through his own gift. There's a reason why when secularists and humanists want to do a day of action instead of a day of prayer, they do blood drives. Because no miracle, no prayer is going to produce that unit of blood that could save a life, but you can. And what about a non-terminal suicide? What about someone who just says, I don't want to live anymore. I'm done. Could you sign up for an appointment? Well, these are the new frontiers. We don't know where the end is going to be. I had a conference discussion once with a collection of other humanists, and the theme of the discussion was, what is a good death? What counts as a good death? And many of the people in the room said something like, I'd like to go in my sleep. I want there to be no pain. To use a phrase from the Bible, I want to wake up in the morning and be dead. It's actually a phrase in the Bible. When they woke up in the morning, they were all dead. So that's what they want. They want to go to sleep and then just not wake up. But I asked in response to this, we're talking about a good death, but a good death for whom? Is that kind of a death the best kind of a death for the family? For the loved ones? What if it came out of nowhere and they didn't know how to say goodbye? They didn't have time to say goodbye. Now, if that's the end of a degenerative disease and you know it's happening, that's one thing, but you don't know, you don't get to schedule that one. There's no appointment for not waking up the next morning. So, what is a good death, and for whom is it a good death? Is it important to have closure, a chance to say goodbye, a goodbye party, and put your affairs in order? But what if that's lingering, and what if it's painful? There's no one good death that's perfect for everybody. And we don't always get to choose. But maybe sometimes we do have some choice. I did a funeral once for a man who had lived on his own into his late 90s. He had lived without any independent care coming in to help him into his mid-90s. So a couple years of decline, and that was about it. When I met with the family in his apartment to talk about his life and prepare for the funeral, one of his sons said to me, you know, to live this long of a life, generally healthy, to have loving relationships with my family, and to have lived an exciting life, where can I sign up for that? I'll take that. I'll take that deal. So we may not get to choose how we live all the time. We may not get to choose what diseases we face. We may not even get to choose how we die. But maybe sometimes we can. And maybe sometimes our choice of a good death enables a good death process for everybody, if we can face reality with courage. Talking about death is hard. We don't do it very often. There's actually a phenomenon that we're considering starting here as a joint program with Kol Hadash and the North Shore Unitarian Church called Death Cafe, where you get to meet and you talk with people about aspects of the process of death so it becomes part of life. It's simply something that happens and something that we have to learn to live with. And stay tuned for more news on that. But I want to end with a poem by Nancy Wood, which explores this concept of a good day to die. Today is a very good day to die. Every living thing is in harmony with me. Every voice sings a chorus within me. All beauty has come to rest in my eyes. All bad thoughts have departed from me. Today is a very good day to die. My land is peaceful around me. My fields have been turned for the last time. My house is filled with laughter. My children have come home. Yes, today is a very good day to die. And in that last line of the poem, I love the word yes. Yes.